I watched my father drop his wedding ring into a puddle of wine that my sister had just poured onto my 6-year-old son's painting. Not spilled. Poured. On purpose. While the family laughed. And my mother? She didn't comfort Jacob. She wiped the table. That's when I realized I'd been protecting the wrong people my entire life. And my dad? He'd been keeping receipts. For years. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type "interested" in the comments. And I will give you a heart. The first drop of wine hit the paper at exactly 4:15 in the afternoon. I remember because I was watching the clock, counting down the hours until we could leave my parents' cabin and go home. My sister Jessica didn't spill it. She poured it. Deliberately. Slowly. She stood over my 6-year-old son Jacob, tilting her glass of Pinot Noir with this casual, almost bored precision, like she was watering a plant she didn't care about. Jacob had spent 3 entire days on that watercolor painting. 3 days. It was a landscape of the lake outside our parents' cabin, a gift he'd been meticulously working on for his grandfather. The kind of thing a kid that age pours his whole heart into because he doesn't know yet that the world can be cruel. Now, dark red liquid bled across the blue sky he'd painted, soaking through the paper, warping the edges, turning his hard work into a soggy, ruined mess. And I just stood there. Frozen. Watching it happen like I was underwater. Jessica looked down at him with this smirk on her face and said, "He needs to learn that the world doesn't care about his little doodles. It's taking up space on the table." Then she added, "And honestly, Jacob needs to toughen up." She finished the glass, set it down on the wet paper with a dull thud, and looked around the room like she was waiting for applause. And you know what? She got it. My Uncle Mark, sitting on the sofa with his beer gut hanging over his belt, slapped his knee and said, "That's a $50 lesson right there, kid. Toughen up or get eaten." The laughter started then. It rippled through the cabin in this sharp, ugly wave that made my skin crawl. My mother chuckled nervously, desperate to keep the mood light like she always does. My cousin smirked. And Jacob? Jacob just froze. He stared at the ruin of his painting, his small hands trembling over the table, his whole body going rigid like he'd been turned to stone. I didn't scream. I didn't rush to wipe up the wine. I didn't even breathe for the first few seconds. I just watched my son. Jacob didn't make a sound. His shoulders shook and his face turned this mottled red, but he didn't cry out. He bit his lip until it turned white, physically compressing himself into that chair, trying to make himself small enough to disappear. He wasn't looking for comfort from anyone in that room. He was looking for invisibility. He was waiting for the laughter to stop, hoping that if he was quiet enough, if he didn't react, the predator would lose interest and move on to something else. And in that silence, I saw it. I saw the invisible chain wrapping around his neck. It was the same chain I had worn for 29 years. The same chain that had taught me to be quiet, to be convenient, to swallow my anger and my hurt so I didn't disturb the peace. So I didn't make things awkward for everyone else. I was watching my son learn the fawn response in real time. Right there at that table. He was learning that his pain was a joke to the people who were supposed to love him. He was learning that his job wasn't to be a kid or to create things or to feel safe. His job was to smile through the humiliation so the adults wouldn't be uncomfortable. He was learning to be me. And the realization hit me like a physical blow, colder than the lake water outside that cabin. I wasn't just watching him get bullied by my sister. I was watching him inherit my trauma. I was passing down a legacy of silence, a genetic predisposition to be a doormat, to let people walk all over me because keeping the peace was more important than keeping my dignity. If I didn't break that chain right now, in this exact second, he would carry it for the rest of his life. He would grow up apologizing for taking up space, just like I did. I looked across the table at my father, David. He was sitting at the head of the table like always, his hands folded over his empty plate, his face carved from stone. Unreadable to anyone who didn't know him. But I knew him. I'd spent my whole life reading that face, trying to figure out if I was safe or if I'd done something wrong. And I saw the way his knuckles had turned white as he gripped his fork. I saw the muscle in his jaw jump. The air in that cabin turned electric, heavy with the pressure of things that had been unsaid for decades. For my entire life. I could feel it building like a storm about to break. My father's eyes were fixed on Jessica, and there was something in that look I'd never seen before. Something cold and calculating and absolutely done. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the wood floor, this harsh grinding sound that cut through the laughter like a knife through flesh. Everyone went quiet. I didn't move to clean up the mess. I didn't ask for a towel or try to salvage the painting. I walked around the table and stood directly between Jessica and Jacob, using my body as a shield to block her view of him. I didn't look at the wine spreading across the table. I looked at her. And for the first time in my entire life, I didn't feel that familiar urge to fix everything. I didn't feel the need to smooth over the edges or crack a joke to lighten the mood or apologize for existing. I felt this cold, hard clarity. Like a bridge burning down behind me, and I was the one who lit the match. It wasn't rage. Not exactly. It was accounting. I was done paying interest on a debt I never owed in the first place. You enjoyed that, I said. My voice wasn't loud. It was flat. Clinical. Like I was reading a diagnosis. You enjoyed watching a 6-year-old create something, and you enjoyed destroying it. Jessica rolled her eyes, already reaching for the wine bottle on the sideboard to pour herself another glass. Her movements were loose and arrogant, like this was all beneath her. "Oh, Sarah, don't be so dramatic," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "It's paper." I did him a favor. Now he can learn to do something useful instead of making messes. Useful. I repeated the word, and it tasted like iron in my mouth. Like blood. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Jessica's smirk faltered just a little, her glass pausing halfway to her lips. My mother gasped, this sharp intake of air that signaled the beginning of her panic spiral. But I didn't blink. I wasn't the sous chef anymore, managing tickets and keeping the kitchen calm during a dinner rush. I was a mother watching a predator circle my child. And I was done negotiating. I looked at my father again. He hadn't moved, but his eyes had shifted from the table to me. There was something in his expression. Recognition maybe. Or permission. Before I could say another word, my mother, Susan, rushed into the scene like she always does. But she didn't go to Jacob. She didn't hug the crying child or check if he was okay. She grabbed a handful of napkins and started frantically wiping the wine off the table. "Oh, Jessica, you're so clumsy," she chirped, her voice high and tight, vibrating with this desperate, manic energy. She was scrubbing the wood, ignoring the ruined painting completely like it didn't exist. "Sarah, don't make a face. It was an accident. We can buy him a coloring book. A nice one. With stickers." She looked up at us, her smile stretched too thin, her eyes pleading like we were the ones being unreasonable. "Let's just have a nice dinner, please. It's Labor Day. We're family." I watched her scramble around that table, and the pity I usually felt for her just evaporated. Gone. I realized then that my mother wasn't confused. She wasn't helpless or naive or just trying her best. She was an addict. She was addicted to the illusion of a happy family, and she was willing to pay any price to maintain it. But here's the thing. She never paid the price herself. She taxed us. She taxed the good children, the quiet ones, the ones who wouldn't scream or throw tantrums or burn the house down. She sacrificed our dignity to appease the monster because Jessica was the only one who threatened to make a scene. Susan would let Jacob bleed just to keep the carpet clean. "Exactly," Jessica said, emboldened by our mother jumping to her defense like she always did. She leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine, looking smug. "He's too soft. Sarah babies him. I'm doing him a favor, teaching him how the real world works." That was it. The snap of the final thread holding everything together. My father, David, stood up. He didn't do it quickly. He did it with this slow, creaking heaviness, like an old building finally giving way after years of structural damage. He walked over to the mantel where this rustic wooden sign hung, the words, "Family is forever," painted in cursive script. He stared at it for a second, and I swear I could see him thinking. Calculating. Then he turned to face Susan. What my father did next didn't just shock the room. It dismantled 30 years of lies in under 60 seconds. "You wiped the table," my father said. His voice was dangerously low, this rumble of thunder before the storm breaks. "You didn't check on the boy. You worried about the wood stain." Susan froze, a wine-soaked napkin clutched in her hand like evidence. "David, stop being dramatic," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm just trying to." "You're trying to keep the peace," he interrupted, and the way he said it made it sound like an accusation. Like a crime. "But there is no peace, Susan. There is just silence. And I am done paying for it." He looked down at his left hand. He twisted his gold wedding band, the one that had been buried in the flesh of his finger for 40 years. I watched him walk to the kitchen sink, pump a dollop of dish soap onto his knuckle, and begin to work the ring off. It was painful to watch. He grimaced, pulling and twisting, his face going red with the effort until the ring finally slid over the joint with this wet pop that I felt in my chest. He walked back to the table, held the ring over the puddle of wine that was still soaking into Jacob's painting, and he dropped it. It hit the wet paper with a dull thud, splashing red drops onto the white tablecloth like blood spatter. "I am done keeping your peace," he said, looking directly at my mother. "And I am done protecting you." The silence in that room wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. It sucked all the air out of the cabin. My mother stared at the ring sitting in that wine like it was a grenade that had just landed in her lap. Jessica laughed, this sharp, nervous bark of a sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Dad, are you senile?" she scoffed, though I could see her eyes darting around the room looking for support. "It's a painting. You're going to divorce Mom over a $5 watercolor set? That is pathetic." David didn't look at her. Didn't acknowledge her at all. He walked over to his travel bag in the corner of the room, unzipped it, and pulled out this thick black leather-bound notebook. It looked old. The spine was creased, the edges worn like it had been handled 1,000 times. He walked back to the head of the table and set it down with a heavy thud that made the wine glasses rattle. "I have been a structural engineer for 40 years, Jessica," he said, his voice calm, factual, absolutely terrifying. "My job is to track stress fractures. To find the cracks before the building collapses. I track failures." He opened the book. The pages were filled with his handwriting, neat and precise, meticulous columns of dates and numbers that looked like accounting ledgers. 3 years ago, he continued, running his finger down the first page, "You told me you needed $5,000 for a business loan. You said your influencer career was taking off, but you needed new equipment to take it to the next level." Jessica crossed her arms, rolling her eyes like this was all so beneath her. "Yeah, and I paid you back. Mostly." "What is this, an audit?" "You didn't pay back a dime," David said flatly. "But that's not the point. The point is, I started tracking. Not just the big loans. Everything. Every time your mother said she needed extra cash for groceries. Every time she withdrew money for home repairs that never happened. Every time our joint savings account dipped for emergencies that were never explained." He turned the book around so Jessica and Susan could see the columns. Pages and pages of them. I tracked the dates. I tracked the amounts. And then I hired a forensic accountant to track where the money actually went. Susan made this small, strangled noise in the back of her throat. She reached out a trembling hand. "David, please don't do this. Not in front of everyone. Everyone needs to know," David said, his voice getting louder. "Because everyone has been laughing at Sarah. Everyone has been laughing at Jacob. Everyone thinks they're weak. But they aren't weak. They are the ones paying the bill." He looked at me then, and his eyes were full of this deep, aching apology that made my throat close up. "I let this happen, Sarah. I let you think you were less than her. I let you think she was special and you were just there. Just the quiet one. The good one. But I was watching. I was counting." He turned the page. Taped to the paper were bank transfer receipts, highlighted in yellow. "This isn't an allowance, Jessica," he said. "This is a ransom." My sister's face had gone pale. She wasn't smirking anymore. "Dad, what are you talking about? You're not making any sense." August 14th, 2 years ago, David said, looking down at the ledger. $12,000. "You said it was for a brand partnership buy-in." April 3rd, last year. $8,000. "You said it was for medical bills." He looked up, meeting Susan's terrified eyes. But the biggest one was 3 years ago. The night of the Labor Day party. The one we didn't attend because you said you were sick, Susan. My mother was shaking her head frantically now, tears streaming down her face, mascara running in black streaks. "David, stop. Please. Protect the name. Think about the family name." David's voice rose, cracking with a fury I had never heard from him in my entire life. "You didn't protect the name. You protected a criminal." He turned the page. This time, there wasn't a receipt. There was a copy of a police report taped to the paper. The room tilted. I gripped the back of Jacob's chair to steady myself. "The $174,000 wasn't for business loans, Jessica," David said, his voice shaking now. "It wasn't for gifts or investments or helping you build your brand. It was hush money." Jessica froze. All the arrogance, all the smugness, all that casual cruelty just evaporated, replaced by this sudden, stark terror. She looked at the door like she was calculating whether she could run. 3 years ago, David said to the room, to all of us, Jessica drove home drunk from a party. She hit a parked car. And then she hit a pedestrian. A 19-year-old girl walking her dog. I gasped. The room spun. I remembered that time. Jessica had disappeared for a month. Mom had said she was in Europe, finding herself, doing some soul-searching. It was all lies. She didn't stop, David continued, his voice cold and flat like he was reading from a report. She fled the scene. A hit and run. The girl survived, but she had 2 broken legs, a fractured pelvis, and a traumatic brain injury that she's still recovering from. Susan was sobbing into her hands now, her whole body rocking back and forth like she was trying to comfort herself. You took our retirement money, David said, looking at my mother with this expression of absolute betrayal. $174,000. You paid for a lawyer to bury it. You paid a settlement to the girl's family to keep it out of civil court. You paid off the car repair shop to fix the dent off the books. You told me it was a parking dispute. You told me it was handled. He slammed the book shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in that small cabin. You stole our future to cover up her crime. And then you let her sit here at this table and mock a 6-year-old boy for painting a picture. You let her destroy his work because you taught her that destruction has no consequences. He looked at Jessica, who was pale as a ghost now, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You aren't a businesswoman, Jessica. You aren't an influencer. You are a liability. And your mother is your accomplice. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a family myth dying in real time. Jessica tried to rally. She stood up, smoothing her expensive dress, trying to summon that arrogance that had protected her for 33 years. She looked at the ledger, then at David, and scoffed. "So what?" she spat. "It was an accident. Mom helped me. That's what mothers do. They help. Unlike you." She glared at David, her chin high, defiant. "You're just jealous because Mom loves me more. I don't need your money anyway. I have my own brand. I have my own followers. I don't need this dusty old cabin." David looked at her with this cold, detached pity. It wasn't the look of a father looking at a daughter. It was an engineer looking at a condemned structure. "You have nothing, Jessica." He reached into the back of the ledger and pulled out a folded document. He placed it on the table right next to his discarded wedding ring and the ruined painting. "This cabin is in my name. It was my inheritance from my father. Your mother's name is not on the deed." He smoothed the paper flat. "Legal documents. You have 1 hour to vacate these premises. All of you. Susan included." And that's when my mother realized she'd bet everything on the wrong child. And she was about to lose it all. "You can't kick us out," Susan wailed, her hands clutching at her chest like she was having a heart attack. "Where will I go? It's pouring rain outside, David. You can't do this." "I don't know," David said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. Empty. Like he'd already grieved this moment and come out the other side. "Maybe you can stay with the daughter you invested so much in." He turned back to Jessica, and I watched my sister's face change. The mask was cracking. "And regarding your own money," David continued, pulling his phone from his pocket and glancing at the screen, "as of 10 minutes ago, while you were pouring wine on my grandson's art, I froze the joint accounts. I reported the transfers as fraud pending a forensic investigation. The bank has locked everything. Your credit cards. Mom's cards. The business account you funnel money through. All of it." Jessica pulled out her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen, frantic, shaking. She tapped her banking app. I watched her face crumble in real time. The color drained away, leaving her looking gray and small and suddenly very, very young. "It's declined," she whispered, staring at the screen like it had betrayed her. And there it was. The illusion of power meeting the reality of an empty wallet. I watched my sister, the bully, the golden child, the success story we'd all been forced to celebrate for decades, shrink before my eyes. Without the financial drip from my parents, without that constant stream of bailout money, her entire personality evaporated. Her status, her confidence, that cruel edge she'd always had, gone. She wasn't a powerful woman. She was a child in a costume she hadn't paid for. Her power was never real. It was rented. And the lease was up. "Your power was rented, Jessica," David said, echoing exactly what I was thinking. "And the landlord is closing the building." He walked over to the front door and opened it wide. The storm outside had broken, and rain was pouring down in sheets, turning the dirt driveway into mud. The wind howled into the warm cabin, bringing the smell of wet pine and cold lake water. "Get out." Jessica looked at Uncle Mark, who had been laughing and slapping his knee earlier. He looked away, suddenly fascinated by the floorboards. Wouldn't meet her eyes. She looked at my cousin, who was pretending to check his phone. She looked at Susan, who was just weeping, useless and broken, unable to save anyone, not even herself. Finally, Jessica looked at me. Her eyes were wide and wet, filled with this sudden, desperate realization that she was completely alone. That all those years of cruelty had bought her nothing. "Sarah," she pleaded, her voice trembling in a way I'd never heard before. "Tell him he's crazy. You can't let him do this to me. I'm your sister." I looked at her. Really looked at her. I looked at the woman who had terrorized me for 3 decades. Who had made fun of my clothes, my job, my choices, my son. Who had told me I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too weak. Who had poured wine on a 6-year-old's painting just to prove she could. I looked at the wine stain spreading across Jacob's work. I thought about the silence my son had learned in that moment. The silence I was breaking right now. "You should hurry," I said, my voice as cold as the rain outside. "Traffic is going to be terrible." Jessica's face twisted. For a second, I thought she might cry. But then the cruelty came back, that last desperate grab for power. "You're going to regret this, Sarah," she hissed. "All of you. When I get back on my feet, and I will, you'll come crawling back. And I won't be there." "Good," I said simply. And I meant it. David stepped aside from the doorway, gesturing toward the rain with this terrible politeness. "The clock is ticking, Jessica. 58 minutes now." My mother tried one more time. She grabbed David's arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. "David, please. Think about what you're doing. Think about our marriage. 40 years. 40 years, and you're throwing it away over money?" "I'm not throwing it away over money, Susan," David said, gently removing her hand from his arm. "I'm ending it because you chose her over everyone. Over me. Over Sarah. Over your grandson. You made your choice a long time ago. I'm just finally accepting it." "But I love you," Susan sobbed. "I love all my children equally." "No, you don't," I heard myself say. My voice surprised me. It was steady. Calm. "You love Jessica more because she scares you. You love her because she threatens to leave, to make scenes, to ruin holidays. So you feed her. You sacrifice everyone else to keep her happy because the rest of us are too polite to burn the house down." Susan turned to me, her face a mess of tears and running makeup. "Sarah, that's not true. I've always loved you. You know that." "No," I said. "You've always used me. There's a difference. You loved that I was quiet. That I didn't ask for anything. That I cleaned up messes and kept my mouth shut and made everything easier for you. But that's not love, Mom. That's convenience." She reached for me, and I stepped back. Put Jacob between us like a barrier. Don't, I said. Don't touch him. Don't touch me. You had a choice today. When Jessica poured that wine, you had a choice. Comfort your grandson or protect your favorite daughter. You chose. You always choose. The truth of it hung in the air like smoke. Susan's hand dropped. She looked around the room one more time, like she was waiting for someone to rescue her, to tell her this wasn't happening. No one moved. Jessica grabbed her purse, her designer bag that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She walked toward the door, her heels clicking on the hardwood, trying to maintain some dignity. She stopped in the doorway, rain already soaking her shoulders. This family is pathetic, she said, her voice shaking with rage. You're all pathetic. Sarah, you're going to spend the rest of your life being boring and broke, raising a soft little boy who'll never amount to anything. And Dad, you're a bitter old man who's going to die alone in this apartment with your stupid ledgers. David didn't even flinch. Better alone than enslaved, he said quietly. Jessica turned and walked out into the rain. Susan scrambled after her, grabbing at napkins and her purse, still crying, still pleading. Jessica, wait. Wait for Mommy. We'll figure this out. We'll go to a hotel. David will calm down. He always calms down. But I knew he wouldn't. I could see it in his face. This wasn't anger. This was clarity. The door slammed shut behind them. Uncle Mark stood up awkwardly. I should probably get going too, he muttered, not looking at anyone. This is family business. Yes, David said. You should go. Within 5 minutes, the cabin was empty except for me, David, and Jacob. The silence was different now. It wasn't heavy or suffocating. It was clean. Like the air after a lightning strike. I walked over to the table and picked up Jacob's ruined painting. The wine had bled through completely, but I could still see the outline of what he'd made. The lake. The trees. The little dock he'd painted with such care. I'm sorry, baby, I whispered, kneeling down next to him. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Jacob looked up at me with those big eyes, still red from holding back tears. Is Grandpa really going to divorce Grandma? Yes, I said. Because I wasn't going to lie to him anymore. Wasn't going to teach him that we pretend everything is fine when it's not. Is it because of my painting? He asked, his voice so small. No, David said, walking over and kneeling down beside us. It's because of a lot of things that happened long before you were born, Jacob. But what happened today showed me something I should have seen a long time ago. Sometimes people hurt you because they can. And if the people who are supposed to protect you won't do it, then you have to protect yourself. Did I do something wrong? Jacob asked. No, I said firmly, pulling him into my arms. You did everything right. You created something beautiful. And someone cruel destroyed it. That's on them, not you. Do you understand me? That is not your fault. He nodded against my shoulder. David picked up his wedding ring from the puddle of wine. He looked at it for a long moment, then walked to the trash can and dropped it in. The sound of it hitting the bottom was final. Permanent. "I'm listing this place tomorrow," David said, looking around the cabin like he was seeing it for the first time. "And I'm buying an apartment in the city. Near you and Jacob, if that's okay." I looked at my father. Really looked at him. And for the first time in my life, I saw him not as the distant authority figure, but as a man who'd been trapped in his own silence. "It's more than okay," I said. But the real fallout didn't hit until the family found out what else David had been documenting. And when I saw those files, I understood why he'd waited so long. 2 weeks after the cabin incident, David called me. "Can you come over to my new apartment?" he asked. "There's something I need to show you. Something I didn't want to reveal in front of Jacob." The way he said it made my stomach drop. I got a babysitter and drove across town to his new place. It was a modest 2-bedroom apartment with big windows overlooking the park. Clean. Simple. Peaceful. When I walked in, that black leather ledger was sitting on his kitchen table like a bomb waiting to go off. "Sit down, Sarah," he said, pouring us both coffee. His hands were steady, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. What I showed everyone at the cabin, that was just the financial documentation. The money trail. But there's more. A lot more. He opened the ledger to a section I hadn't seen before. The pages were filled with printed emails, text message screenshots, and what looked like medical records. "I need you to understand something," David said, his voice careful, measured. "I loved your mother for a very long time. I built a life with her. But about 5 years ago, I started noticing things. Little inconsistencies. Lies that didn't add up. Money disappearing. And I realized I didn't actually know the woman I'd been married to for 35 years. He slid a stack of printed emails across the table. "These are emails between your mother and Jessica from the last 4 years. I found them on the family computer that Susan thought I didn't know how to access." I started reading. My hand started shaking by the second email. The first one was from 3 years ago, right after Jessica's hit and run. "Mom, I need you to get more money from Dad. The lawyer says the family might push for criminal charges if we don't settle higher. Can you pull from his retirement without him noticing?" Susan's response: "I already took what I could from the joint account. Tell me exactly how much you need. I'll figure something out. Your father doesn't pay attention to the statements anymore. We can fix this, baby. We always do." "They called it fixing," I said, my voice hollow. "They called covering up a hit and run fixing things." "Keep reading," David said quietly. The next email made me feel sick. It was from 2 years ago. Jessica writing to Susan, "Sarah's being such a sanctimonious bitch about me borrowing money again. Can you talk to her? Remind her that family helps family? She acts like she's better than me just because she has some boring restaurant job and a kid." Susan's reply: "Don't worry about Sarah. She's always been jealous of you. Ever since you were little, she couldn't handle that you were more outgoing, more ambitious. I'll handle her. She'll calm down like she always does. She knows better than to make waves." I looked up at David, tears burning in my eyes. She knew. She knew Jessica was using her. Using both of you. And she just called me jealous. "There's more," David said, and he didn't sound angry anymore. He sounded tired. Bone-deep tired. He pulled out another stack of papers. These were text messages, printed out and dated. These are from the last year. Between Susan and Jessica. I read through them, and with each one, the picture became clearer and uglier. Messages about how to get more money from David without him noticing. Conversations about me. About Jacob. One text from Jessica to Susan, dated 6 months before the cabin incident. "Sarah's kid is so weird. He just sits there drawing all the time. No wonder he doesn't have friends. She's raising him to be a loser just like her." Susan's response, "He is a bit odd. But Sarah's sensitive about it. Just don't say anything when we're all together. You know how she gets." Another one from Jessica, "Why do we even invite them to family things? Sarah barely talks and the kid is annoying. Can we just do holidays without them? Susan, we can't exclude them, honey. It would look bad. People would ask questions. Just smile and bear it for a few hours. For me?" I set the phone down. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't hold the paper anymore. "They tolerated us," I said. "We were an inconvenience they had to endure to keep up appearances." "Yes," David said simply. He pulled out another document. This one looked official. Legal. "This is a private investigator's report. I hired him 8 months ago when I started to suspect the money situation was worse than I thought." The report was thorough. Brutal. It outlined every transaction, every lie, every manipulation. But it also included something I hadn't expected. A psychiatric evaluation that Susan had gotten done 3 years ago. Privately. Without telling David. "She went to a therapist," I said, scanning the document. "She knew something was wrong with how she was handling Jessica. She knew she was enabling her." "Read the therapist's notes," David said, pointing to a highlighted section. I read it out loud, my voice shaking. "Patient demonstrates classic enabler behavior with adult daughter. Shows signs of codependency and fear-based decision-making. Patient admits to lying to spouse about financial matters to protect daughter from consequences. When confronted about the harm this causes to other family members, patient becomes defensive and terminates session. Recommendation: family therapy and boundaries. Patient declined both. She went to 1 session," David continued. 1. The therapist told her exactly what she was doing. Told her she was sacrificing you and me to enable Jessica's destructive behavior. And Susan walked out and never went back. Then she hid the bill in her personal email and paid for it with cash she took from our emergency fund. I felt like I was going to throw up. She knew. She knew what she was doing to us, and she chose to keep doing it anyway. Yes, David said. And that's why I couldn't stay. It wasn't just the money, Sarah. It wasn't just the lying. It was the fact that when confronted with the truth about her own behavior, she chose to bury it. She chose Jessica over reality. He pulled out one more document. This is the hardest one. It was a journal entry. Susan's handwriting. Dated 5 years ago, right after I'd told her I was pregnant with Jacob. Sarah announced her pregnancy today. She seemed happy, but I can't help thinking this is a mistake. She's barely keeping her head above water financially, and now she wants to bring a child into that? Jessica says Sarah's doing it for attention. I think she might be right. Sarah's always needed validation. A baby won't fix that. I just hope she doesn't expect us to help raise it. We've already done our time with children. I read it twice. 3 times. Trying to make the words mean something different than what they clearly said. She thought I had Jacob for attention, I whispered. She didn't want to help. She didn't want to be a grandmother to him. She saw him as a burden from the moment I got pregnant. David reached across the table and took my hand. I found this 2 years ago. I've been carrying it around, trying to figure out what to do with it. Trying to decide if I was overreacting. If I was being unfair. You weren't, I said, my voice breaking. You weren't overreacting. This is who she is. This is who they both are. I know that now, David said. But for years, I convinced myself I was wrong. That I was being too harsh. That marriage meant staying and working through things. But Sarah, you can't work through something with someone who won't admit there's a problem. And your mother has spent decades perfecting the art of denial. He closed the ledger. I wanted you to see this because I need you to understand something. What happened at the cabin wasn't a snap decision. It wasn't me losing my temper or having some kind of breakdown. It was the result of years of documentation, investigation, and finally accepting the truth. The truth that Mom chose Jessica over everyone, I said. The truth that she's been doing it our whole lives. Yes, David said. And the truth that she'll never change. Because changing would require her to admit she was wrong. And Susan would rather burn down the whole family than admit she made a mistake. We sat in silence for a long time. The coffee got cold. Outside, I could hear kids playing in the park, their laughter floating up through the windows. Normal sounds. Happy sounds. Finally, I spoke. What are you going to do with all this? David looked at the ledger, then at me. I'm keeping it. In case Jessica or Susan tries to come back. In case they try to rewrite history or play the victim. I have evidence. Documentation. Proof. They can't gaslight me anymore. They can't gaslight you. And the divorce? I asked. Filed yesterday, David said. Susan's been served. She tried calling me 17 times last night. Left voicemails crying, apologizing, saying she'll change. But I didn't answer. I'm not negotiating anymore. I looked at my father, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Freedom. He looked lighter somehow. Younger. How do you feel? I asked. Sad, he said honestly. I'm grieving the marriage I thought I had. But I'm not grieving the one I actually had. Does that make sense? It made perfect sense. Yeah, I said. It does. But Jessica wasn't going down without a fight. And when she showed up at my apartment 3 weeks later, I realized she'd learned absolutely nothing. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Jessica showed up at my apartment. I was home with Jacob, helping him with his homework at the kitchen table. We were working on multiplication tables, his little tongue sticking out in concentration the way it always did when he was focused. Then I heard it. The buzzer. Insistent. Angry. 3 long buzzes that felt like an invasion. I checked the video intercom, and there she was. Jessica. She looked different. Her hair wasn't done. She was wearing jeans and a regular t-shirt, not the designer clothes she usually flaunted. No makeup. She looked tired. Desperate. And that made her more dangerous, not less. Sarah, I know you're home, she said into the camera. We need to talk. Please. I'm your sister. I almost didn't answer. Almost just let her stand there until she gave up and left. But something in me needed to face this. Needed to see if she'd learned anything at all. I buzzed her up. Jacob, go to your room and put your headphones on, I said quietly. Now, baby. He looked at me with those wise beyond his years eyes. He'd gotten good at reading my tension. Is it Aunt Jessica? He asked. Yes, I said. And I need you to stay in your room until I come get you, okay? No matter what you hear. He nodded and disappeared down the hallway just as the knock came at my door. I opened it. Jessica stood there, and for a split second, I almost felt sorry for her. She looked smaller somehow. Diminished. But then she opened her mouth. Finally, she said, pushing past me into my apartment without being invited. Do you know how long I've been trying to reach you? You blocked my number. You blocked Mom's number. That's so childish, Sarah. I closed the door slowly. Deliberately. You have 5 minutes, I said. Then you leave. 5 minutes? Jessica laughed, but it was brittle. Sharp. I'm your sister. You're really going to put a timer on family? Yes, I said flatly. 4 minutes and 45 seconds now. She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Like she couldn't compute this version of me that wasn't backing down. Fine, she said, throwing her purse onto my couch. I need your help. I need you to talk to Dad. He's being completely insane, and you're the only one he might listen to. No, I said simply. Jessica blinked. What do you mean, no? I haven't even explained what I need yet. I don't care what you need, I said. The answer is no. To whatever you're about to ask. No. Her face started to flush. Sarah, I'm losing everything. Everything. Do you understand that? Dad froze all the accounts. The fraud investigation triggered an IRS audit. I can't access any money. I had to move out of my apartment. I'm staying with Mom in her crappy little condo, sleeping on a couch. I lost my car. I had to get a job at a mall kiosk selling phone cases to teenagers who don't even know who I am. Good, I said. And I meant it. Her eyes went wide. Good? You think it's good that I'm suffering? Yes, I said. I think it's good that you're finally experiencing consequences. For the first time in your entire life, you're being held accountable for your actions. Jessica's hands clenched into fists. This is Dad's fault. He's vindictive. He's cruel. He's punishing me for one mistake I made 3 years ago. One accident. You almost killed someone, Jessica, I said, my voice rising. You drove drunk. You hit a 19-year-old girl. And you left her bleeding in the street. That's not a mistake. That's a crime. And Mom helped you cover it up with money that wasn't even hers. It was an accident, Jessica insisted, her voice getting shrill. I panicked. I was scared. You've never made a mistake when you were scared? I've never committed a hit and run, I said coldly. And I've never asked my mother to steal from my father to cover it up. Jessica started pacing my small living room like a caged animal. You don't understand. You've always had it easy. You've never had pressure. You've never had to maintain an image, a brand. I had followers. I had sponsorships. I had a life. And Dad destroyed it because of some self-righteous moral crusade. You destroyed it, I corrected. You destroyed it when you made the choices you made. Dad just stopped enabling you. There's a difference. She whirled on me. Enabling me? He's my father. He's supposed to help me. That's what parents do. They help their children. Help, yes, I said. Cover up felonies and drain their retirement to do it? No. That's not help, Jessica. That's being an accomplice. She laughed, this wild, almost manic sound. Oh, listen to you. Saint Sarah. Perfect Sarah who never does anything wrong. You're loving this, aren't you? You're loving watching me fall. You've always been jealous of me. I'm not jealous of you, I said, and the truth of it settled over me like a blanket. I pity you. That stopped her cold. You pity me, she repeated, her voice dangerous. Yes, I said. Because you're 33 years old and you still haven't figured out that actions have consequences. You still think the world owes you something. You still think that if you throw a big enough tantrum, someone will come rescue you. But nobody's coming, Jessica. Dad's done. I'm done. You're on your own. If you were really done, you'd help me fix this, Jessica said, switching tactics. Her voice got softer. Pleading. Sarah, I'm your sister. We're blood. You can't just abandon me. Talk to Dad. Tell him you forgive me. Tell him to unfreeze the accounts. He'll listen to you. He feels guilty about how he treated you. Use that. And there it was. The manipulation. The calculation. She wasn't here to apologize. She wasn't here to make amends. She was here to use me. Again. Get out, I said quietly. What? Jessica asked. I said get out of my apartment. Now. Sarah, come on, now, I said, louder this time. Before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. Jessica's face twisted into something ugly. All the fake sweetness evaporated. You sanctimonious bitch, she hissed. You think you're better than me? You work in a restaurant. You live in this tiny apartment. You're raising a weird kid who doesn't have any friends. Your life is pathetic. And yet, I said calmly, I sleep just fine at night. Can you say the same? She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. But she stopped, turned back. Mom was right about you, she said viciously. You've always been jealous. You've always been less than me. And now you're trying to punish me for being more successful, more beautiful, more everything. I read the emails, Jessica, I said. The words hung in the air like a grenade. Jessica froze. What emails? The ones between you and Mom, I said. Dad showed me. All of them. Every single conversation where you called me boring, called Jacob weird, talked about how I was a loser and you didn't even want us at family gatherings. Where you laughed about manipulating Mom for money. Where you planned how to get more cash out of Dad without him noticing. I read all of it. The color drained from her face. He had no right, he had every right, I interrupted. It was his computer. His email server that he paid for. And now I know exactly what you think of me. What you've always thought of me. So don't stand here and pretend this is about family. You don't know what family means. Jessica's mouth opened and closed. For once in her life, she had nothing to say. You know what the saddest part is? I continued. I spent 29 years thinking there was something wrong with me. That I wasn't good enough. That I was boring and jealous and less than you. I let you make me feel small. But I'm not small, Jessica. You are. You're small and cruel and empty. And I'm done letting you take up space in my head. You'll regret this, Jessica said, her voice shaking. When I get back on top, and I will, you'll come crawling back. And I'll remember this. I hope you do remember it, I said, opening the door for her. Because this is the last conversation we're ever going to have. She stood there for a moment, like she was waiting for me to break. To apologize. To back down like I'd done 1,000 times before. But I didn't move. Didn't blink. Finally, she walked out. I closed the door behind her and locked it. 3 locks. Then I leaned against it, my whole body shaking. Not from fear. From relief. From the weightlessness of finally cutting the cord. Jacob appeared in the hallway, his headphones around his neck. Is she gone? He asked. Yes, baby, I said. She's gone. And she's not coming back. He walked over and hugged me around the waist. Good, he said simply. I didn't like her. Me neither, I said, hugging him back. Me neither. But the real ending to this story came 6 months later, when I saw what freedom actually looked like. And it was nothing like I expected. 6 months later, the light in David's apartment was different. Clean. White. It streamed through big windows that overlooked the city park, nothing like the dim yellow light of the cabin or the harsh fluorescent glare of the old family house. The apartment was smaller than the house he'd shared with Susan for 40 years, but it was peaceful. There was no walking on eggshells here. No heavy sighs from the other room signaling an incoming guilt trip. No fear of the next explosion. No wondering which version of the family you'd get that day. Just peace. I'd brought Jacob over for the afternoon. It had become our Saturday ritual. We'd have lunch, then David would teach Jacob something. Woodworking. Basic electrical work. How to change a tire. Things a grandfather teaches a grandson when he's not busy managing a crisis or covering up someone else's mess. Today, they were building a custom frame for a new painting Jacob had made. A do-over of the lake scene that Jessica had destroyed. But this one was different. Better. Jacob had grown as an artist in 6 months. The colors were more confident. The brushstrokes more deliberate. This wasn't the work of a scared child trying to please people. This was the work of a kid who felt safe enough to experiment. To make mistakes. To create. I sat on the floor leaning against the wall, watching them work. David was kneeling next to Jacob on a drop cloth, both of them covered in sawdust. David was teaching him how to use a miter box to cut wood at precise angles. You have to measure twice, Jacob, David said, his voice gentle. Patient. The voice of a man who no longer had to shout to be heard over chaos. Precision matters. If the frame is strong, the art is safe. Like this, Grandpa? Jacob asked, sawing carefully, his tongue poking out in concentration the way it always did. Exactly like that, David said, and the pride in his voice made my throat tight. You're a natural. This was what family was supposed to look like. Not people tolerating each other for appearances. Not sacrificing some members to appease others. Just people who genuinely enjoyed being together. Who built each other up instead of tearing each other down. My phone buzzed. I glanced at it. Another letter from Susan had arrived in the mail. I could see the notification from my doorbell camera showing the postal carrier dropping it in my mailbox. That made 18 letters in 6 months. I hadn't opened a single one after the first 3. The first letter had been apologetic. Full of, I'm so sorry, and I never meant to hurt you, and can we please talk about this like adults? The second letter had been angry. Accusing me of being cruel, of turning my father against her, of destroying the family. The third letter had been desperate. Begging. Promising to change, to go to therapy, to be better. I'd burned that one in my kitchen sink and stopped opening them after that. I knew what they were. They were attempts to drag me back into the chaos. To make me responsible for her feelings. To tax me for a piece I no longer owed her. Another letter from Grandma Susan? David asked, not looking up from the wood he was measuring. He'd started calling her that. Grandma Susan. Not your mother. Not my wife. The distance in the title was intentional. Yeah, I said. Number 18. She's persistent, David said, marking the wood with a pencil. I'll give her that. Are you going to open it? Jacob asked, looking up from his sawing. No, baby, I said. I'm not. Why not? He asked. It was a fair question. An honest question. The kind kids ask when they haven't learned yet that sometimes you're supposed to pretend things are fine when they're not. Because Grandma Susan wants me to fix something that I didn't break, I said carefully. She wants me to make her feel better about choices she made. And that's not my job. My job is to take care of you and take care of myself. Not to manage other people's guilt. Jacob nodded slowly, processing. Like when Tommy at school said sorry for pushing me, but then he pushed me again the next day? Exactly like that, I said. Sometimes people say sorry because they want you to stop being upset, not because they actually plan to change. That's dumb, Jacob said, going back to his sawing. Yeah, I agreed. It really is. David smiled at that. He set down his measuring tape and looked at me. The divorce was finalized yesterday, he said quietly. I got the notification from my lawyer this morning. I sat up straighter. How do you feel? He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Sad, he said finally. I'm grieving the marriage I thought I had for 40 years. The partnership I believed in. But I'm not grieving the reality of what it actually was. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, I said. Are you going to tell her, he asked. Susan. About the finalization. No, I said. She'll find out from her lawyer. She doesn't get my emotional labor anymore. David nodded approvingly. Good. You're learning. Learning. That was the right word. I was learning how to have boundaries. Learning that love shouldn't cost you your dignity. Learning that family isn't an excuse for abuse. Learning that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. What about Jessica? I asked. Have you heard anything? David's face hardened slightly. She's still working retail. Still living with Susan in that condo. The fraud investigation closed 2 months ago. She wasn't criminally charged, but the IRS hit her with a massive tax penalty for unreported income. Turns out all those gifts from Susan were technically taxable. Good, I said. And I meant it. Not because I wanted Jessica to suffer for the sake of suffering, but because I wanted her to finally face the consequences of her choices. To learn that the world doesn't revolve around her. That actions matter. She tried to contact me last week, David continued. through LinkedIn of all places. Sent me a message saying she'd been in therapy and wanted to make amends. And I asked. I didn't respond, David said. Because I looked up the therapist she claimed to be seeing. It's not a real practice. The address doesn't exist. She was lying. Again. Still trying to manipulate her way back into access. I shook my head. Some people never learn. Some people are so committed to the lie that they'll keep performing it even when there's no audience left. She asked about you too, David said, looking at me carefully. In the message. Said she wanted to apologize to you. To make things right. Let me guess, I said. She didn't actually apologize in the message. She just said she wanted to. Exactly, David confirmed. It was all, I want to make amends and I hope we can rebuild our relationship, but zero actual accountability. Zero acknowledgement of what she did. Just vague therapy speak designed to get her foot back in the door. She's never going to change, I said. It wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was just a fact. Like saying the sky is blue. No, David agreed. She's not. And neither is Susan. They're both too invested in the story they've told themselves. The story where they're the victims and we're the cruel ones who abandoned them. Jacob had stopped sawing. He was listening, even though he was pretending not to. Kids always know more than we think they do. Grandpa, he said quietly. Did you ever love Grandma Susan? David set down the piece of wood he was holding. He looked at Jacob with complete seriousness. Yes, he said. I loved who I thought she was. I loved the woman I married, or at least the woman I believed I was marrying. But people change. Or sometimes, people show you who they really were all along, and you finally let yourself see it. That's sad, Jacob said. It is sad, David agreed. But you know what would be sadder? Staying with someone who hurts the people you love. Staying with someone who asks you to sacrifice your own child to protect another child who doesn't deserve protection. That would be sadder. Jacob thought about that. I'm glad you left, he said finally. Me too, buddy, David said, ruffling his hair. Me too. We worked in comfortable silence for a while. The apartment filled with the sound of sawing and the smell of fresh wood. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. I almost didn't open it, but something made me look. It was from Jessica. I don't know how she got my new number. The message read, Sarah, I know you hate me. But I'm your sister. We're blood. That has to mean something. Please. I'm drowning here. Just talk to Dad for me. That's all I'm asking. 5 minutes of your time. Don't you have any compassion? I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I blocked the number. Deleted the text. Jessica? David asked, reading my face. Yeah, I said. Asking me to talk to you on her behalf. Asking for compassion. What did you say? David asked. Nothing, I said. I blocked her. Good, David said simply. And that's when I realized the most important lesson of all. Freedom doesn't come from getting an apology. It comes from no longer needing one. Jacob finished the frame 3 hours later. He stepped back, covered in sawdust, and looked at his work with this pure, uncomplicated pride that made my heart ache. The frame was perfect. Slightly imperfect, actually, with one corner not quite matching the others, but perfect in the way that handmade things are perfect. Real. Honest. Made with care. Can we put the painting in now, Grandpa? Jacob asked, practically bouncing on his toes. Let's do it, David said, and together they carefully fitted the new lake painting into the frame Jacob had built. When it was done, David held it up. What do you think? He asked. I think it's beautiful, I said. And I meant it. Not just the painting. Not just the frame. The whole thing. The moment. The peace. The safety. The fact that my son could create something and know it wouldn't be destroyed. That he could be proud of his work without fear. Where should we hang it? David asked Jacob. In your new living room, Jacob said immediately. So you can see it every day. David's eyes got a little wet. He cleared his throat. I'd be honored, he said. They hung it together on the wall across from the big windows, right where the afternoon light would hit it. And when they stepped back to admire it, I saw my father put his hand on Jacob's shoulder. A simple gesture. But it meant everything. It meant, I see you. I value you. Your work matters. You matter. The things Jessica had destroyed with wine and cruelty and casual dismissal, we'd rebuilt with wood and time and intention. That evening, after we'd cleaned up the sawdust and had dinner, Jacob fell asleep on David's couch. I covered him with a blanket and sat back down at the kitchen table with my father. We drank tea in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the park. I need to tell you something, David said finally. And I need you to really hear it. I set down my mug. Okay. I'm sorry, he said, looking directly at me. I'm sorry for all the years I stayed silent. For all the times I watched Jessica hurt you and didn't intervene. For letting your mother sacrifice you to keep the peace. For making you think that being quiet and good meant you were less valuable than being loud and demanding. His voice cracked. I told myself I was keeping the family together. That I was being a good husband by supporting Susan's decisions. But I wasn't. I was being a coward. And you paid the price for my cowardice. I felt tears sliding down my face. Dad, let me finish, he said gently. I watched you grow up thinking you weren't enough. I watched you apologize for existing. I watched you make yourself smaller and smaller trying to fit into the space Jessica left you. And I did nothing. I told myself it would get better. That Susan would see what was happening and fix it. But she never did. And I should have protected you. That was my job. And I failed. You didn't fail, I said, my voice thick. You're here now. You chose us. I should have chosen you 30 years ago, David said. But I'm choosing you now. And I need you to know something, Sarah. You were never the problem. You were never boring or jealous or less than. You were kind. You were thoughtful. You were strong in ways that Jessica will never understand. And I'm so proud of the woman you became, despite everything working against you. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, tears streaming down my face. And Jacob, David continued, looking over at my sleeping son. That boy is extraordinary. He's creative and sensitive and brave. And if Jessica thinks those things make him weak, then she understands nothing about what real strength looks like. We sat with that for a moment. Then David reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I want to show you something, he said. He unfolded it. It was a check. Made out to me. For $87,000. I stared at it. Dad, what is this? It's half of what I recovered from the cabin sale, he said. The other half is going into a trust for Jacob's education. But this half is for you. To do whatever you want with. Move to a bigger apartment. Go back to school. Start your own business. Take a vacation. I don't care. It's yours. No strings. No expectations. I can't take this, I said automatically. The old programming kicking in. Don't take up space. Don't be a burden. Don't ask for anything. Yes, you can, David said firmly. You can, and you will. Because you earned it. You earned it by surviving. By raising a good kid in impossible circumstances. By finally standing up for yourself. By breaking the chain. I looked at the check. $87,000. It was more money than I'd ever had at once. More money than I'd ever imagined having. This is from the cabin? I asked. Yes, David said. I sold it to a developer. Got a good price. Susan tried to contest the sale, but her lawyer confirmed what I already knew. The deed was solely in my name. My inheritance from my father. She had no legal claim. How did she react? I asked. David's face was unreadable. She sent me a letter. Said I was stealing from her. That she'd put 40 years into that cabin, that she'd made it a home, that I owed her half. But she didn't have any legal right to it, I said. None, David confirmed. And her lawyer told her as much. But that's not really the point, is it? The point is that Susan still believes she's owed something. That her feelings entitle her to other people's property. Other people's money. Other people's peace. He took a sip of his tea. I didn't respond to the letter. There's nothing left to say. I folded the check carefully and put it in my pocket. Thank you, I said. This means everything. You mean everything, David corrected. You and Jacob. You're what matters now. We talked late into the night. About the divorce. About his plans to travel, something he'd never done because Susan didn't like flying. About maybe taking Jacob on a road trip next summer to see national parks. About the future. A real future. Not one held hostage by the past. Around 11, I woke Jacob up gently. "Come on, baby. Time to go home." He rubbed his eyes and stumbled to his feet. David walked us to the door. "Same time next Saturday?" he asked. "Same time," I confirmed. He hugged Jacob first. A real hug. Long and tight and full of love. Then he hugged me. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. So proud. We drove home through quiet streets. Jacob dozed in the back seat. When we got to our apartment, I carried him inside and tucked him into bed. He was getting too big to carry, but I did it anyway. These moments don't last forever. I sat on the edge of his bed for a minute, watching him sleep. His face was peaceful. Relaxed. No tension. No fear. No waiting for the next explosion. Just a kid sleeping safely in his own bed. My phone buzzed one more time. Another text from another unknown number. Jessica again, probably. Or Susan. It didn't matter. I turned my phone off without looking. I didn't need to know what they wanted. Didn't need to engage. Didn't need to explain or justify or defend. I was done. I walked into my small kitchen and made myself tea. Sat at my little table in my tiny apartment. And I felt something I hadn't felt in 29 years. I felt free. Not happy exactly. Not yet. Freedom and happiness aren't the same thing. Freedom is quieter. It's the absence of fear. The absence of obligation to people who hurt you. The absence of that constant low-level anxiety that you're about to be punished for existing. I thought about Jessica in her mall kiosk. About Susan in her condo, writing letters that would never be answered. About the family system that had collapsed because it was built on lies and exploitation and the sacrifice of some members for the comfort of others. And I felt something I didn't expect. I felt grateful. Grateful that it had finally broken. Grateful that my father had finally seen the truth and acted on it. Grateful that Jacob would grow up differently than I had. He'd grow up knowing that love doesn't cost you your dignity. That family isn't an excuse for cruelty. That you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. I finished my tea. Tomorrow, I'd take that check to the bank. I'd start planning. Maybe a bigger apartment with a room where Jacob could have a proper art studio. Maybe some money set aside for emergencies so I wouldn't have to live paycheck to paycheck. Maybe therapy for both of us to process everything that had happened. But tonight, I just sat in the quiet. In the peace. In the freedom. And I realized something that made me smile. Jessica had asked me if I had any compassion. And the truth is, I do. I have compassion for the girl I was, who thought she had to earn love by being convenient. I have compassion for my father, who spent 40 years in a marriage that cost him everything. I have compassion for my son, who learned too young that the world can be cruel. But I don't have compassion for people who refuse to change, who hurt others and then demand forgiveness without earning it, who see accountability as punishment and boundaries as betrayal. That's not compassion. That's complicity. And I'm done being complicit in my own destruction. 6 months ago, I watched my father drop his wedding ring into a puddle of wine. And I thought it was an ending. But it wasn't. It was a beginning. The beginning of a life where I don't apologize for taking up space. Where my son doesn't learn to make himself small. Where love is measured by actions, not words. Where family is chosen, not endured. If you've ever had to break a bond to save yourself, I want you to know something. You made the right choice. Freedom is worth it. Peace is worth it. Your dignity is worth it. And anyone who tells you otherwise is someone who benefits from your silence. Don't give it to them. Not one more second. Not one more apology. Not one more piece of yourself. You've paid enough. The debt is cleared. Walk away. Build something new. And when they come knocking, asking for compassion, asking for one more chance, asking you to fix what they broke, remember this: you don't owe them anything. Not your time. Not your energy. Not your peace. You're free. And that check I deposited the next morning? I used part of it to enroll Jacob in art classes. Real ones. With a teacher who saw his talent and nurtured it. And every Saturday, we still go to David's apartment. We build things. We create things. We laugh without fear. We exist without apology. And that wine-stained painting that started it all? I kept it. I framed it myself and hung it in my bedroom where I see it every morning. A reminder of the day I stopped being quiet. The day my father stopped being complicit. The day we both chose freedom over peace. And every single day, I'm grateful we made that choice. Because peace built on silence isn't peace. It's surrender. And I'm done surrendering. We all are. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.